something about getting the gospel out in Japan. And I just realized our friends on YouTube were waiting. Hello, friends on YouTube. Sorry, I forgot to hit the go live stream button there. But we're both streaming on YouTube and Instagram now. So some people are on both one or the other audiences there. But as we jump in, where are you watching from, and what are some barriers to getting the gospel out in your area? I'd love to hear about those, and then maybe we could have a discussion about that afterwards as well. But first, I'd like to share with you some of the barriers that we face in Japan as far as getting the gospel out, just so you're aware. Someone that came over this past summer said something interesting. They said, it's not that Japan doesn't have problems. It's just that they have different problems. And when you first visit and you hear about Japan, it almost kind of looks like this utopian, society. The streets are clean, relatively low crime rate, the food is good. But then you kind of look a little bit deeper and realize that there's some spiritual needs. So let's look at what some of those might be today and talking about getting the gospel out. So we're talking about stumbling blocks and barriers toward Christianity in Japan. So first, there are definitely some cultural barriers, things in the culture that, just are very different than America. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is, this whole idea of fitting in and preserving harmony. There is a proverb, a Japanese proverb that says, basically the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And there's a very big push towards group harmony and fitting in and keeping the peace, if you will. And because of that, people are taught to, make sure that, everybody is fitting in, or make sure that you don't stick out. That is one of the biggest things that is part of Japanese society. So you might not even agree with somebody, but you just kind of go along with it and just stick around. That's one of the things that they do here in Japan. So, when we share the gospel, a lot of times there does come a point where you have to confront somebody with the truth of what the Bible says. But if you try to do that in a way that's very aggressive and just like you against me and just kind of like a showdown, a lot of times people will back down because they just don't want to offend you, and they don't want to. There's this non-confrontational culture. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And so they'll skirt around it, move around it. It's very much a part of Japanese thinking. So in Japan, they have this concept of face, and what you say out front, and then what you actually think is called honne, is what you really think, and tatemae is what you put out front. And it's just understood that depending on where you are and the setting, you might have to just kind of go along and agree with something, even if you don't actually agree with it, because that's the setting that you're in. So you have to be careful when sharing the gospel that, people aren't just going along with it for the sake of going along with it, because that's just their culture and they're just trying to be polite. So that is a barrier that you kind of run up against. And in America, a lot of times you think that, the rugged individualism, I am my own man, I make my own decisions, on a spectrum, America's like super individualistic. And then Japan is like super group oriented. So we go along with the group. What is the group saying? And so they're total opposites. And if you don't realize that, and you come at it from just the super individualistic notion, you overlook the fact that people are, very conscious of what other people are doing. It's more than just peer pressure. It's to the nth degree here in Japan. So that is one thing that we do face here in Japan. Another cultural barrier, and I'm not sure why this is on a indented line. Oh, that's because it's centered. That's why. Lack of basis for morals. And, I think we're seeing this a little bit in America as well. But, there isn't a, this is right, this is wrong, in sort of like a Judeo-Christian ethic kind of thing. And so, in Japan, the basis for your morals is basically what the group thinks. And so the group says this is okay, that's accepted. The group says this is not okay, it's not accepted. And we're seeing a lot of that in Western culture and civilization as well. But there isn't a ruling idea of what is right and what is wrong. And we're seeing that in America as well. But that is prevalent here. And so, when someone says, okay, is this right or is this wrong? We're saying, well, kind of looking around the room and saying, what's everybody else saying? Japan is not this law type of society. I mean, we have laws, okay? It's very structured and people follow the rules, but the people who decide the rules and say what's right and wrong, that's kind of like a group discussion, if you will. So there's that. And finally, we looked at this just a minute ago, but the politeness and face. And so say for example, you're sharing the gospel with somebody and you're like getting there and you're talking about it and you're telling them about the gospel and you're like, man, this person, they're nodding, they're agreeing, I think they're going to get saved. Actually, they're just trying to be polite. And Japan is a very polite culture, and to your face, they might not disagree at all. They might just be like, oh, okay, yeah, interesting. Wow, I've never thought of that way before. Okay, interesting. They're not listening. If it's someone that you don't really know and you're having that kind of conversation with them, more times than not, if you just are trying to be in this super evangelism mode and you're like, I'm sharing the gospel with people, they're just kind of going along and they're like, okay, yeah, that's very nice. And they won't show you this like, oh, that's so nice kind of feel. You won't feel that, but Japanese people are very good at showing that, making you feel like, okay, yeah, they're interested and that was interesting to them. And they're like, oh, okay, and they'll listen. If you're not sure where they are, a lot of times if it's like your first time meeting them, and you just try to like make this gospel presentation, like, would you like to pray with me right now? They'll probably just go along with it, or just be like, I'm okay for now. And like, I thought they were listening. You have to be careful because they're just trying to be polite, and that's a cultural barrier that you have to overcome when you get across that. And we'll talk about how you do that a little bit here in just a minute. Another thing is, people are very conscious because it's a group-oriented society about what other people are thinking. What are the other people going to think? What are other people going to say? So, what is someone going to think about me, a Japanese person, if they find out I'm going to church because of the emptiness that I feel, the depression that I feel, what are others going to think? What are they going to say? And so, there's all kinds of hurdles that people have to jump over to get into church or listen to the gospel and encounter that. So these are some of the things that you have to think about when sharing the gospel in Japan. And so one of the things that you really have to learn in Japan, and there are obvious exceptions, but that's what they are exceptions, is that you need to earn and build trust in order to gain a real audience with somebody. And this is where you kind of get into the idea of, what counts as somebody actually hearing the gospel? Did you say a bunch of words at them and they just kind of nodded their heads? Or did they hear what you were saying, process what you were saying, and think about it inside their heart and say, okay, wow, that's something I need to consider? If they are still putting on I'm just trying to be polite to you and think about you, because Japanese people are very thoughtful. So if they're just nodding along because they're being polite, they're not really processing the information you've given them as wow, this is for me. So you've got to build trust. You've got to, go beyond just that surface level conversation there. And so that takes time. Japanese people, we have an article about this on our website about the island and the islanders. And Japan is an island country, and learning how to get trust and build trust with people, it takes time, and it's a process. And there are exceptions, so I don't want to give you the impression that this doesn't ever happen, But a lot of times your first conversation with somebody isn't this full out gospel presentation. Sometimes it will be, but not all the time. More times than not, it's, getting to know them, maybe planting a seed, sharing a little bit of truth about God and Jesus, and getting them to think, and taking the conversation from there. It's a continuing conversation. It's a process, not a pitch. It's a process, not a pitch. And so you definitely want to think about that as you're going through. But there are other barriers as well. And so we've looked at, fitting in, politeness, lack of morals, things like that. But there's also religious barriers that we have to talk about as we are sharing the gospel and getting the gospel out in Japan. And one of the obvious ones might be Buddhism and Shintoism. These are the two traditional Japanese religions in Japan. Now, this creates not a monotheistic view, a one God view of the world. There's many gods. They're not omniscient. They don't know everything. They're regulated to certain areas, districts. And so when we think God, we think omniscient, all-powerful God. But as far as Japan, when they think God, there's no concept of what is God really like. So that is a barrier. The other thing is that a lot of the religious elements are woven into the culture. And to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, in America, for example, we have Christmas in America. A lot of people celebrate Christmas. And, some people would argue, Christmas is actually pagan, this, that, or the other. I understand. But Christmas, as a whole, is a Christian holiday, right? But there's a lot of people who celebrate Christmas in America who aren't Christians, right? They put up a tree, they like the lights, they things like that. Hi, John Walls. Yes, I am actually live, and I did get your text, and I haven't been able to read it yet. Thank you for joining us today. But say you're not a Christian in America, but you celebrate Christmas, okay? So if you celebrate Christmas, are you Christian? Not exactly. In the same way, a lot of Japanese people will do, they'll go to the shrine or go to the temple. They'll celebrate the big traditional holidays and things that are centered around these places, but they're not really practicing religious people. And so, it's a very hard distinction where the culture ends and the religion begins. When we talk about in terms of Christmas, okay, if you celebrate Christmas, are you a Christian? Not necessarily. Well, it would be easy for us to say, well, you go to the temple or the shrine on New Year's, so you must be this or must be that. Not necessarily. But because those elements are woven into the culture and the history of Japan, it creates this whole new dynamic that you have to deal with. But I think beyond that, those are on the surface. But beyond that, we actually are facing a lot more of this, and it would be humanism and atheism. And so most people don't really know if there's actually a God. If they go to the shrines, they're like trying to get good luck. That's really what Japan is more about, trying to get good luck, so I can get lucky and pass an exam or get a good job, things like that. And they're very humanistic. I asked a guy one time, I said, okay, so you go to the shrine and you pray and ask for them to help you with something, ask for this God to help you with something. If you don't get what you asked for, whose fault is that? Right? Is it the God didn't help you, or what? He's like, well, actually, that's probably just like you didn't try hard enough. So, there's this, it's actually humanistic and very man-centered in their thinking because the gods aren't all-powerful in all that. And so that's another barrier that we would face is, humanism, atheism, things like that. But one more, and this is also a barrier, is the Christian cults that are in Japan. We have Christian cults in Japan. And what I'm talking about in Christian cults is, for example, Mormonism is in Japan. The Jehovah's Witnesses are in Japan. And in our city, our main station, and some of the big ones, there's the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're Japanese people. They have signs. Would you like to study the Bible? They have the blue jay all the time, and people know about them. They know about the problems that they've caused. There's been other cults like the Unification Church. You might not have heard of them before. One of the guys, the gentleman who assassinated one of our former prime ministers, you probably heard about that on the news. His mom was part of that religious organization, funneled tons of money to them. He had lots of spite towards them because of that, and the political associations shot our former prime minister. And so, there's an overall negative view towards religious organizations in general. And then Christian cults, people are like, whoa, but they know that they're there. And so people find it hard to differentiate between, which ones are the real ones and which ones are the fake ones. And so you have to be very careful in how you go about it, and make sure that you say, yeah, we're not really like them. We're a little bit different. We're more of a Protestant, because people in Japan think Protestant, Catholic, cults. So we're not Catholic, we're not cults. So we kind of fit in the Protestant category, and being careful to kind of, differentiate that, because they've heard all kinds of bad things and crazy things. It's like, yeah, they have some reservations. So if you just go all out in a gospel presentation, and they have no idea, that might be running through their head. I've heard of these cults. They take all your money, and yeah, so I'm not sure if I want to listen to this guy. Takes time, earn trust. They're like, yeah, I know this person. We spent some time together. I know they're not crazy. They're a good person. I'd be willing to listen to what they have to say. Now we're talking. So just something to keep in mind there. Now, there are other barriers, though, and these are traditional barriers. Tradition in Japan. And this one is, I think, one of the biggest ones. Japan is just resistant to change. Japan does not like to change. You might say, wait, I thought Japan is like this super high-tech place where, they have all this cool technology and things like that. That's true to a degree. However, there's been people who've done research about this, and they talk about what words do Japanese people like to hear. Survey says, okay, survey about words that Japanese people like to hear. And they said, number one that everyone likes to hear is thank you. Words of gratitude, thanks, things like that. People love hearing that. But the least favorite word on the list, there's like 30-some words. The least favorite word that people liked was change. People don't like change. Very resistant to change. And so we saw a lot of this during the COVID response, when Japan was kind of dealing with it, and just watching how the government reacted and dealt with the response was interesting. What they would do is they would say, all right, everybody, we are going to have a meeting. The government officials are going to have a meeting about what to do for COVID next week on this day. Okay, newsflash. Everybody, next week on this day, we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And then they'd have their meeting. And then, the day after the meeting, we've decided that we're going to be implementing some things about, asking businesses to shut down early and things like that. We're going to be announcing this and making it official next week at this time. We're going to have an official press conference and telling you that we're going to ask everybody to shut down and do these measures and things like that. So it wasn't this like all of a sudden someone stood up and said, all right, everybody, listen up. Starting today, we're going to do this. They said, we're going to have a meeting about this. We're going to have another press conference telling you that we're going to tell you this. And then they have the press conference, and then they say, we told you that we're going to be doing this, now it's official. And so this whole process just to do this prevention measures. And so that's because Japan is typically very resistant to change. It takes time. And I've told people this before. Things in Japan are slow, but slow is not wrong. Slow is not bad. Slow is just slow. It just takes time. But if you come into it expecting things to change very rapidly, then you could become very frustrated. And so there are people who adapt to change early on, but on the whole, Japan is very slow. So even the process of digitizing things is taking a long time in Japan, which sounds crazy, right? Because it's supposed to be super advanced. Try going to the city hall and getting your paperwork done, and you will realize just how resistant to change Japan has actually been. So resistant to change. That's one thing. Another traditional barrier is that Japan has very minimal Bible knowledge. And, in America, a lot of people have a little bit of idea of some Bible sources. There are people, depending on your area, again, where people have no idea, right? They think David and Goliath is just a parable about the little guys knocking down the big guys in business or something like that. But in Japan, it's not uncommon. You talk to somebody and like, have you ever read the Bible before? No. Have you touched a Bible before? No. Do you know what the Bible's about? No. And so, if you jump in and start trying to share the gospel with somebody and, they have absolutely no idea, they don't know that there's just one God. They don't know that God created them. They don't know what sin is. They don't know about Jesus, that he died, that he rose again, and all these things, then they're just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And there's no framework for them to work off of. They have no idea what you're talking about. And that's why, it sometimes takes a little bit of time. Now, that's not to say you can't share the gospel in just an encapsulated form. Like there's one God, our Father. He made man. There's a mediator who, his son, he sent Jesus. He died on the cross, rose again from the dead. That is the cure for our sin. And by believing the gospel, we can be forgiven and we can become a child of God. We can share those things. But on the first go, they probably just got like, wow, there's a God and Jesus is affiliated with him. Okay, so minimal Bible knowledge. So you can't just plow over people in your zeal to try to get the gospel out. One more thing though, and there are some common questions that you're going to have to answer with people, and some of them are across the board, no matter where you are. Some of them are a little bit harder to swallow. For example, what about my grandparents? Now, this is talking about, we've shared the gospel with them a little bit more, and they're thinking about it, and they're considering, like, do I want to commit my life to this? Do I want to believe this? And they go, wait. Okay, so you're saying if I don't believe the gospel, then I will die and be punished for my sins in hell for eternity. That's what the Bible says. Okay, so you're telling me that my grandparents died and went to hell and there's nothing I can do about it? That's a very hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And it's something that you're going to have to face, and you have to say, I'm sorry, they had to make a choice, and I'm not sure if they had a chance to hear the gospel. Maybe they did. We can't know for sure, but you're going to have to decide what you're going to do about this. And for a lot of people, that's too much. They say, yeah, no, I don't want a religion like that. Because you're basically wanting me to say, by believing, therefore, yeah, grandma and grandpa went to hell. And I don't want to say that. People don't want to say that a lot of times. Another question that people ask is, what if I can't live as a Christian after I believe? So, there's these ideals in the Bible that the Bible teaches us about. I'm not sure if I can live up to those. And that's true. And you say, actually, well, you can't live as a Christian. It's not hard. It's impossible. And God gives you the power to live for him. But these are some common questions that you will face as you're sharing the gospel. But on the whole, I don't really think that all these barriers are the biggest obstacle to getting the gospel out in Japan. The biggest barrier, I would say, is that we don't have enough people in Japan working to get the gospel out. And Jesus said this. He said, pray the Lord of the harvest. Pray to the Lord to send workers, laborers into the harvest, because the harvest is plentiful. There's a lot to work to be done, but the laborers are few. And now it might take some time to get to that harvest. You plant the seed, you till the ground, you plant the seed, you share the gospel, you're praying for them, you're spending time with them, getting them to understand the gospel, you bring them to a point of decision. But one person can only do so much. And Japan's biggest problem is that we don't have enough people here doing the work. Statistics say Japan's about 1% Christian. Most people believe that's like 0.5%, because that includes Catholics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. They just lump them up 1.5%. Most people believe it's like 0.5%, 0.5% Christian. So really, if we do everything that we can, we still need more people on the ground working to tell people about Jesus, to earn that trust, to trust God for those gospel conversations and plant those seeds and sharing the gospel with them. So what you can do about it is, one, you can pray with us that God will send people to Japan. That's number one. We really want you to pray with us. If you don't do this already, I have my phone set every morning to go off at 9:38, and that's from Matthew 9:38, where Jesus says to pray for laborers. So that's something that you can do right now. You can go to your clock app, whatever, set an alarm for 9:38, and that'll be your reminder every day to pray for God to send people to Japan and to send people into the work. That's Jesus' prayer request, so pray for that. And then number two, I want to share this with you as well. As you're praying about it, you might be saying, well, maybe God wants me to go to Japan. And we're praying that maybe some of you that are watching this video, this live stream today, maybe you're praying about that. I know some of you guys are watching this and you're actually already coming. But for those of you who are not signed up yet, we have what's called reconnaissance tours, Recon Tours. And right now we're doing them spring, summer, fall. They're 1 week long. And I know Kenny is watching on YouTube. Kenny's coming. I think Abby's over on Instagram and a few others as well. But you guys are coming to on Recon Tour. Our next one is actually less than 2 weeks away. We're super excited about that. But Recon Tour is, just as the name says, it's reconnaissance. It's where you come in, you look at Japan, the spiritual need, figure out what your life would look like here, pray, and then pray about if this is God's next step for you. We'll do a few fun things, but our main goal is for you to see the spiritual need in Japan and begin to pray about what God would have you do to get the gospel out here, and what role you would play in that. And so I would really like you to seriously consider that, to pray about that. There's an application. We don't let everybody come. I'm sorry. There's an application. We look at your application, and based on a few things, we'll have to decide if you can come or not. But all those details are on this website, reachingjapan.com/recon. So if you're praying about this, if God has put Japan on your heart, please reach out to us. Send us a DM or a comment on YouTube, or just go to our website and send us a message, or check out this page to see if this is right for you, because we want you to make an informed decision about ministering in Japan, working in Japan, getting the gospel out in Japan. There's over 100 million people here, 126. The numbers keep changing. Our population is declining. 126 million people. Most of them have never heard the gospel in their life. And so we want you to be praying for people to come and praying about coming to get the gospel out here in Japan. So thank you guys so much for joining today. I do want to take a minute. If there's any questions that you have, throw them into the comment section here, and we will try to answer those with the time that we have remaining. We just hit the 30 mark, so I know some of you will probably have to sign off here. But what kind of questions you have, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Are you thinking about Japan? Are you praying about Japan? What kind of questions you might have about getting the gospel out here in Japan. I've got a comment over here from Instagram. Can you tell us a success story that you've had? It seems impossible to get the gospel through to the Japanese. That's over on Instagram, Chris over there. Thank you so much. Success stories, yes. I think when we talk about Japan not having a lot of Christians, it's easy to think that equals 0%. And that's not the case. You know, Jesus talking to the woman at Samaria, he talks about in the woman, Samaritan woman, the woman at the well. He tells his disciples that he's sent them to labor where others have already labored. And as we are in Japan and ministering and doing these things, a lot of people have been going before us. So there have been other people planting the seed. So not everybody's from scratch. And so, for example, we had a young college student when we were in our previous church working with another missionary who was part of a Bible study club at a secular university, who had started coming to our church, and he had made a profession of faith through that. Also, we saw a gentleman who, that same church plant, during COVID, you know, everything's shut down, everybody's staying home, hardly anybody's coming to church, if at any, but a gentleman started coming. He starts coming to the services, starts listening to the gospel, starts listening to the Bible on his way to work in his car, and he gets saved. And so when we talk about barriers, I think a lot of times the tendency is to think that, oh, it's just so hard. No, it's just a challenge. Just see it as a challenge, and that's okay. So we have seen stuff like that. There's a guy who comes to our church right now who's not a professing Christian yet, but we're praying for him as well. So we have non-Christians in our midst. We've got another comment over on Instagram here. Are the Japanese people less receptive to non-Asian foreigners telling them about Christ? Another good question. So there's definitely this demographic within Japan, and our church doesn't do a very good job at tapping into this demographic just by location. But there are people who love America. Okay, that just plays them. They love America, all things foreign, and kind of going back to the cultural, people like you have to read the air. What are other people doing? And that's the norm, fit in, all that stuff. Some people are just so tired of that they just want to go to Thailand or America or somewhere else where it's not so stuffy, if I might use that word, because they're like, it's just the society just seems to just restrict me, and they love being somewhere else other than Japan. And they like America, they like Australia, they like going overseas. And so they love to talk to Americans, foreigners, the more open to foreign ideas. And so in that sense, they would be a little bit more receptive to hearing the gospel from a non-Asian person, a non-Japanese person perhaps. But that would be more in your cities. If you go to the countryside, it would be a lot more traditional. Now, I've got a comment over here from YouTube. It says, Brian from Oklahoma, thank you. Do you encounter the militant kind of atheism that we have in the U.S., or is it the lazy none kind of atheism? I think, yes, it's definitely not the militant, angry atheist kind of atheism over here. It's just people have no idea. It's not this, I have chosen to reject the God of the Bible and I hate all Christians. That's usually not the case. It's more just like, I've never really thought about this. No one really tells me about this. I'm just kind of doing my thing. So it's not a militant atheism. I've got another comment here. Do you have a recommendation for learning to speak and read Japanese? Are there many that speak English? There are some people who speak English, and there are people who love that niche. There are other people who are like, English is just not my thing. So, they teach English in schools, but it's kind of like, high school Spanish in America. Everybody takes it, but not really anybody learns it. There are exceptions. There are some people who are really good. But as far as learning Japanese, we really recommend you go to a language school in Japan for 2 years. That's part of our internship program. You'd come for 2 years to learn Japanese, learn the culture, and learn how to do ministry as well, and what that looks like. Kind of get the Westernness knocked off a little bit, learn how to minister in a Japanese context. You'd have to do a little bit of preliminary learning in the States. There's a thing called the JLPT, Japanese Language Proficiency Test, and you need a N5. 5 is the lowest, but if you could do an N5, you could get accepted to a language school over here. There's online tools and things like that. Another one over from YouTube. In your opinion, what's the biggest culture shock or biggest challenge for Americans in adapting to Japan? Ooh, yes. I went through culture shock. That might surprise you. I was born and raised in Japan. Homeschooled, okay, so I get it. But I went to college in America and did my adulting, if you will, in the States. So, learning how to live as an adult and function as an adult in Japan was something totally different. And it's very easy to think, one of the hardest things was just learning to follow the process. If you've ever watched the Lego movie, they talk about following the instructions. Japan is kind of like that because there's a manual for everything, and everybody tries to do it by the book. Creative, critical thinking is not encouraged. So, for example, when we first moved to Japan, we had to go to the city hall and let them know that we had moved to the city. You have to let them know when you move out, and then when you move to another city, you let them know that you've moved in. And I showed up at the city hall and said, hey, I just got in from overseas, and I'd like to fill out my paperwork to live here and move in. And they said, okay, well, we need this piece of paper that says that you were overseas, because I'd moved out from a different city in Japan and then came back to Japan to a different city. They said, we need the piece of paper from the other city hall saying that you were overseas. And I said, if you look at my passport, it's stamped when I left, when I came in. You just look at that and it'll tell you. And they said, we have no prior cases where that was handled that way, and so we have to get this piece of paper to prove that you were outside of the country. So in my mind, I'm going, this is the same thing, but for them it said, no, this is how we do this. And coming from the outside, if you say, this is the same as this, it would mean the same thing, so just do this instead, and then they don't accept that, that can be very, very frustrating. And so I think, that's a big culture shock, just learning that, sometimes just this is the way it is. This is how we do it. And don't expect them to go along with your creative skills, because it's not a place where that's really fostered. And so if you follow the book, if they say you need this, 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 and this, if you get those things, it'll work very smoothly. But if you don't, you might find yourself frustrated with that. And I definitely felt that as well. Yes, bureaucracy. That's right. So there is a lot of bureaucracy. Now we've got another comment over here on Instagram. It says, if someone were to come to Japan as a long-term missionary, would it be worthwhile to consider getting a Japanese job to add on to mission support, like becoming an English teacher? And I think there are people who do this route. There are people who use English as their primary ministry outreach. I'm not sure. I think you'd have to pray about that. It would not be recommended, in my opinion. There are people who, for example, are ALT's assistant language teachers. And so they go into the public schools and help out with the English teaching in the school system. The problem with that is a lot of times your contract stipulates that you will speak only English when you're at work. So it limits your time being able to actually learn and speak Japanese. And it's very frustrating for people who come to do that. So it limits your time. I think that, probably what would be better would be if, instead of thinking about using English as a job, you would probably just get a part-time job, like working at a convenience store or restaurant or something while you're in language school. And that would kind of teach you what the service sector looks like, will teach you how to talk with people, what workplace relationships look like a little bit, because there's a lot of vertical, this person is older than me, therefore I talk to them using this kind of Japanese. This person is at the same level as me, so we use a different kind of Japanese. Someone is below me as far as like, um, as far as like, they're younger than me or they have less experience in the workplace, things like that. That all affects the kind of Japanese that you use with them. And if you come in as a teacher, people are talking up to you even though your Japanese is terrible. And so, you kind of miss out on that. So I would not recommend that to most people. Some people, maybe after you've learned Japanese and can speak it well, would be to then maybe thinking about that. But I think you need to actually pray about that and talk with people that you're working with instead of just doing it solo. We've got another question. What is the average cost of living for a family in Japan? That is, I'm sorry, that's too broad. I can't answer that. The cost of living in my city versus the cost of living in Tokyo or Osaka is totally different. Nagoya is a lot cheaper comparatively. So it's a lot more cost effective to live here. For example, what we pay for a 4-bedroom apartment in our city, that's a 3-minute walk. Our apartment is a 3-minute walk from the subway station. That's 10 minutes from the middle of the city. We pay less than a 1-bedroom apartment in Tokyo near one of the stations. And so, I can't just give you a broad statement about what that looks like. I've got another question from John Walls. Thank you for tuning in from Taiwan. What are some examples of successful ways you have met new people and made friends? And this is going to depend on your life stage. For us, our kids have been a tremendous help. Just going to the park, and I talk about this in our blog article that we have on our website. But, as an island country and trying to build trust, people are suspicious of outsiders. So you have to answer the question, what does it take to become an insider? To be someone that people actually are like, okay, I'd be willing to talk to you. So one way for us has been going to the park right by our apartment building, and families bring their kids, and so our kids have been a huge help in that. Showing up on a consistent basis at the same place, people see you and they're like, oh, I've seen this person before, and so you start to talk to them. It takes some time, over a few weeks, few months, and then you start building those relationships. So going to the park with your kids, if you have kids, is a huge help. And talking to the other parents. My wife is super good at this, by the way. I'm not. She is. Another thing is, there's different websites. You go to sports places. There's websites in Japan that are dedicated for people to find groups to play sports. And so, you could go to a thing like that. And even that, you don't expect this great conversation to happen the first time around. I mean, if it happens, great. Pray for that. Awesome. But even if it doesn't happen, you say, that's fine. I showed up. They saw me. That's step number one. And don't get discouraged by that. You got to keep going a few times for people to get to know you and be willing to talk to you and things like that. There's other things called, one website's called meetup.com. The people that are more inclined to foreign stuff, that have been to Australia, America, study abroad, a lot of them are on there. And they have activities and events on there. So those would be some of the ways. And we have a list of those websites on that article I was talking to you about. I can drop that in the comments here in just a second. Got another question. What do you think takes most missionaries off the field in Japan? That's a hard question. I think it varies by person to person. Maybe just expectations, expecting it to go super fast. And then you're there a year and you're like, what are we doing here? Like, nothing's happening. But again, you're plowing the ground. We went through that. We started church a few months. There was a point where like nobody was coming. And I was just like, what am I doing? Like, I almost quit. Okay. So we're not this overnight success at all. But bad expectations, if you don't understand that this is just a process that you have to keep working through. I think another one is maybe burnout. Church planting specifically is a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. And I think if you try to do it alone as just a single family unit, it takes a lot of toll mentally and emotionally and physically. and some people just break. I don't really we did it that way. I don't recommend it. Start as a team. Get other people working with you, because it's not healthy. It's not good for your family. It's not good for you, your spiritual walk as well. And then another thing is just people just make ministry an idol, and then it doesn't satisfy. We have to keep walking with God through that. Something that you always push against, always have to work in. So yeah, it varies person to person. Other people, health issues, things like that. So just having the right expectations and going at it that way, I think, would be super helpful. And so you definitely want to work with somebody, work under somebody to learn what it takes here. All right, I think that is all the questions we have on here on YouTube. Just going back through here, and Instagram. I think that's all we have over here as well. All right, well, guys, thank you so much. Oh, well, one more question. Ryan Carroll. Oh, awesome, Ryan. Thanks for jumping on here. Is there missions work happening in smaller towns or primarily only larger cities? There's actually a ministry that's about their whole thing is reaching rural Japan. And so there are people that do that. There are ministries in smaller towns as well. So it really just depends on your ministry philosophy. Hi, Gavin. Thanks for jumping on. Ministry philosophy. One of the reasons why we have chosen to go to larger cities is that a lot more people are flowing into the cities. The countryside is older a lot of times, dying out. As Japan's population declines, the cities are still actually growing mostly. And that's because people are going from the country and coming into the cities. So if you want to go to where the people are, if we could reach them in the cities, and then as they go back out, they could take the gospel with them. And so, a lot of times people go to the city when they're younger, and then they get older and they're like, I don't like the busy life. I want to go back to where I was born. And then they'll go back to the country. So if they come here anyway, try to reach them while they're here and then send them back out would be more of a strategy than anything. That would be what our thinking would be. And people in the city tend to be less traditional than people in the countryside. People in the countryside are very traditional. And so again, if there's a barrier, why go where it's harder? The gospel needs to go there, and we do agree with that. Just where to spend our time and focus. All right. Another question over on Instagram. What would make your ideal missionary team as far as skills go, personalities, experiences? Not that one is better than the other, but what seems to have more success? I think you need your point person that's going to be doing your preaching. You need someone who just focuses on meeting people full time. If the burden of preaching every week is taken off of them, then they can just spend not partying, but all their time focused on meeting people and reaching people. It really just depends on the model of ministry you're trying to pursue. Are you going after singles? Are you trying to reach families? If so, you need a kids program. So I would say, your lead pastor, your worship leader, song director, whatever you want to call them, children's ministry / evangelism, and what that looks like. There's a large segment of the population that's still single in Japan, and so doing something for singles would also be tremendously beneficial. That's something that you'd have to flesh out, and then just kind of work out the nitty gritty. Like Japan is advanced as far as like social media and things like that. So working on your web presence, dealing with administrative stuff as well. So there's several different pockets of things that need to be covered. It's too much for one person to deal with. And so kind of divvying that out and then everybody jumping in would probably be better. So there's lots of different use cases. That's not the right word. There's lots of different areas that people could get plugged into. Not everybody has to be the main church planter, but there is a lot that falls under that umbrella. So saying what seems to have more success, there's some teams, they're like, we're still trying to figure this out. Other teams, God's blessing them. It really just depends. I think a lot of times we look for a specific formula, and this is not a formula. It's follow Jesus. follow Jesus. If you're not following Jesus, it doesn't matter. You might see a little bit of success, but at the end of the day, what's going to keep you together, keep your team together, keep church together, is if you're all following Jesus. So making that your goal, your mission. We're going to follow Jesus. And yeah, we'll make mistakes. I've made mistakes. You'll probably make mistakes too if you come over here, and that's fine. I mean, you learn from them. And then to say our goal is not even church planting first and foremost, but following Jesus and making that your goal and your primary mission in life, I think would probably be the main thing to do there. All right. Wow, we've gone like 20 minutes over, but thank you guys so much for all of the great questions. I'm going to drop a link in the comments section just for you to, I should have had this pulled up sooner. If there's any other questions, let me know here. But I'm going to drop a link into the comments on both YouTube and Facebook. Not Facebook, Instagram. I'm so old now, I don't think Instagram, I think Facebook. It's so telling, right? It's embarrassing. But we are going to add this. Islanders. We're going to send this your way. Never mind that. I'm looking for this and I can't find it. I can't type. But if you have any further questions, I would love to share those with you. But in the meantime, we'll go back over here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on here. And we're going to say a word of prayer. reachjapan.com/recon if you are interested. If you are interested in coming, look at the application there. That's our website. Oh. We will do that. John Wall's commenting Taiwan's #1. That's okay. We love you too. We love you guys in Taiwan. But let's say a word of prayer, and we'll wrap this thing up. Lord, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for the technology to be able to do this, and the people who are praying about Japan, coming to Japan, praying for Japan. I pray that you'd please help us to continually pursue you first and foremost, but also know that there's so many people here who don't know you. And even though there are all these barriers, it's not like it's impossible, and you are the God of the impossible. And I pray that you would send more laborers here to Japan, people who are sensitive to the culture, who are sensitive to the spiritual needs, sensitive to how to begin and open these conversations and sharing the gospel. I pray that you would do your work here, that more people will find and follow you, and that they will continue to make disciples for you. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care. And we'll probably be doing another one of these next month. So stay tuned. Bye.